ExCultBaby is a new YouTuber who's been putting out some stuff. Has already made a few videos talking about her experience with religion. A former Jehovah's Witness who is now an atheist and is kind of been making videos talking about that amongst some other things. Yeah, you want to kind of talk about yourself a little bit and what your business is here on the YouTubes?
Yeah, sure. Talking itself is like my favorite thing. Really. So I was disfellowshipped from the Jehovah's Witnesses when I was 18. Several months later, I deconverted thanks to, in part, the ACA. So, yeah, they're great. Love you guys. So a little while after that, I started thinking about the Bible stories that I grew up with and how really bizarre they are. And I really wanted to start doing videos about specific Bible stories from a non-scholarly point of view, just as a person reading the stories at face value, how just totally wrong they are. So that's what I started off doing. I have other content on my channel now, but it's mostly Bible-based videos, but I am branching out somewhat. I want to talk more about LGBT issues. I want to talk more with other people who are deconverted, people of other faiths. So yeah, that's what I'm doing on YouTube.
Sweet. So, like, the world of Jehovah's Witnesses is kind of just a different world from, like, most people's experiences. I'd say, on average, people grow up either kind of Christian or, like, either even really Christian sometimes. But even then, that doesn't encapsulate what it's like to be kind of a Jehovah's Witness. You know, they're kind of on a category of its own. So, like, can you kind of describe what that experience was like and how it was kind of different from maybe some other people's experience?
I don't know, at least as far as I can think of, any, even like people who are like super Christian who are probably as isolated as Jehovah's Witnesses often are. I was homeschooled as well, so that didn't help, but Jehovah's Witnesses are very heavily encouraged not to associate very much with people on the outside. Like, obviously, if you have to go to work and school with them, that's fine, but don't seek out any association with them pretty much outside of what's necessary. So yeah, being a Jehovah's Witness is pretty isolated. So they're very heavy into their own community. They're very community focused. There's also, when I was growing up, there was like 3 meetings a week. Now they've consolidated it down to 2, but it's very involved. You pretty much are doing Bible-related stuff or Jehovah's Witness-related stuff every single day. Yeah, pretty much devote your life to it if you want to be an active Jehovah's Witness. It's something that you do every single day. So yeah, if there's anything that's really just different about maybe other Christian faiths, it's just how time-consuming and involved it is probably the number one thing I'd say.
I just want to remind people real quick, this is a live call-in show, so if you want to talk to me and ExCultBaby today, go ahead and call the number in the corner. We have call screeners right now that are willing to take your calls. I noticed somebody was trying to call earlier and they hung up. Well, just wait, hold on a second. We got call screeners ready to pick you up and take you from there. So you were in kind of the Jehovah's Witness world, you know, and you kind of mentioned it's an insular kind of world, you know, even shunning people who have left the faith, right? And there's kind of this veil against the world. You know, the world is kind of this sinful place. I don't think sinly is a word, but sinful, right? And we want to keep the practices of, you know, what our Lord Jehovah has, you know, kind of told us and stuff. At least that's what people who have told me who are, you know.
That is all accurate. That is all accurate.
Yeah. So, like, what was it that got you out of that? Because I imagine, you know, they kind of got every single metric in place to kind of keep you in that world.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And since I was raised in it, it was very likely that I would have stayed in it forever. Unfortunately, I'm attracted to women. So, and that's a big no-no. So basically, it came to the point where, in summary, if I wanted to live my life the way that I wanted to live it, well, let me say this. I'm pansexual. I'm not a lesbian. But I did have attraction to, you know, women as well. And I kind of came to this conclusion that if I was going to be able to live my life the way that I wanted to live it, even if I was going to die in Armageddon for it, I would have to move out of my parents' house. I could have left it up to them to kick me out after finding out that I was kind of living this double life. But at the time, I was still very much a believer, and I pretty much knew that my parents would have to do that if they found out about my lifestyle. So I decided on my own to move out so that they wouldn't have to kick me out, because that would have pretty much been inevitable. So I left and I got excommunicated, or Jehovah's Witnesses say disfellowshipped. And since then, I've pretty much been shunned. And it was only after I'd been out for a little while, spending some time with my boyfriend, now fiance, who is an atheist, he asked me some hard questions that I, after, not being constantly exposed to the apologetics and everything, I just didn't have answers anymore that satisfied him or me. So that sort of slowly kind of wore down my faith after a little while. And on top of that, we watched shows like The Atheist Experience, or rather he would watch them and I would be in the same room or in the car with them while they'd be playing. And one day we were watching an episode of The Atheist Experience that really just kind of made me realize, wow, religion itself is harmful. The things that it teaches, if they aren't true, are detrimental to people. And it was just a very basic thing, like the idea that the soul lives on. It interferes with people's grieving processes. People can't move on if they think that they're going to see these people again. And that is a religious teaching. It's a very common one. And sort of that realization just kind of broke down the cognitive dissonance that I'd had for so long. And I was just kind of like, yeah, this couldn't have come from a God. I don't think I can believe this anymore.
And so we had Telltale here on the show before, who, if you're not familiar with, was also a former Jehovah's Witness as well. And he kind of described a similar experience to yours in the sense that he was disfellowshipped, and he also kind of slowly went through that process of kind of deconverting from his religion. But one thing I noticed that's kind of a connection between both of you guys is you didn't go straight to atheism at first. Like, you didn't dump the God belief first. You kind of left the organized religion side first. But if I'm understanding you correctly, you still had at least somewhat of a God belief or some kinds of religious beliefs even before you kind of completely let those go. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it wasn't just some belief. I completely believed everything that I was taught as a Jehovah's Witness. Even then, I was like, oh, well, I want to have sex before marriage, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that personally, but I know it's wrong and I'll die for it in Armageddon. Like, that was my mentality, was that everything that I'd been taught was still right and I was wrong, but that I was just going to do it anyway, because I didn't actually feel any guilt about it. It didn't make me feel like a sad, empty shell. It didn't make me feel like a husk of a human being. It was just like, I'm out here, I'm living my life, I'm doing what I want to do, and I don't feel bad about it or guilty about it. And that was a relief, because I'd been feeling extremely guilty as a Jehovah's Witness for years and years, and I really just wanted to stop feeling like I wanted to die all the time. And I wasn't suicidal, but I had some suicidal ideation. Like, if I could just press a button that would make me die peacefully in my sleep or have never been born, I would have taken that option. But I wasn't considering actually like harming myself. But I did feel constantly like I just didn't want to be alive.
Wow. Yeah, I can't relate in the sense that the religious structures I grew up with were as binding. But I did feel that guilt. I definitely felt that, like, oh, like, this is it. Like, I'm leaving this kind of community and I could go to hell for this, and that anxiety definitely still lingered with me for a while. I really don't feel it anymore, thankfully. I've pretty much put most of that away. But I know for some people it stays with them for a long time, sometimes their whole lives. Does that kind of anxiety still mess with you sometimes, or have you put a lot of that away?
The funny thing is, after that experience, watching that particular episode of The Atheist Experience, it all just kind of fell away at once. It was kind of like a light switch. Like, I really did. After that, I didn't think about Armageddon much anymore. I mean, I thought about it enough, but whenever I thought about it then, it was prompting me to research rather than being worried about it. And then I was like, oh, the Jehovah's Witnesses have been predicting Armageddon for over 100 years. It's probably not going to happen tomorrow. So,
Yep. Go on.
Yeah. Those things just kind of, it's like I was so close to breaking out of that cognitive dissonance for so long that once I was out of it, I was just out of it,
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. So let's talk about that part for a little bit, because I want to know. Okay, so let's say I'm another Jehovah's Witness member, and I'm coming to you and I say, well, ExCultBaby, why don't you think that Jehovah's Witnesses, are true? Like, why have you abandoned us? What's your deal here? I mean, what would you say to somebody like that?
Well, first of all, nothing I could say to an active Jehovah's Witness would probably change their mind, to be completely honest. But I think probably the number one reason that I left is that I just kind of had this realization that religion in general, religious belief, can do a lot of damage to people. And it was definitely holding me back, because once I realized maybe the reason that I don't feel guilty about these things is because there's nothing to be guilty about. And that's just something that I was told, was that I was supposed to feel guilty about them. And of course, further research after that reveals all these other reasons, like, everything with 1914, 1975, all of these end of the world predictions, really, that just never came to fruition. So they just covered their butts by changing it. Like, okay, well, maybe it wasn't the end of the world, but it was the invisible second coming of Jesus Christ. That makes sense, right? Like, it just seems so obvious to me now that they were just trying to save their image, and that none of it really adds up.
Yeah, and I think it's easy for people to look at, especially groups like the Jehovah's Witness, and say, well, how could anybody believe that? Like, what's the deal? Like, obviously they made these predictions and they didn't come true, right? Like, that should be obvious to everybody. But it seems that there's a significant amount of people, at least, I don't know what the statistics are in the United States, but at least hundreds of thousands of people who still are part of the organization, who still hold a lot of these beliefs to be true. What do you think it is that keeps people having these kinds of beliefs that kind of maybe not make as much sense to the outside world?
Well, there's a couple of factors in that. Obviously, the first one is just indoctrination and fear. Jehovah's Witnesses use quite a lot of that. They, lately, especially in their videos and literature, they have been very heavily emphasizing that Armageddon is just around the corner. To the point where it's kind of like scare tactics. Like, it's actually kind of scary, the kind of ideas that they're putting in people's heads about the end of the world and how the governments are all going to come after Jehovah's Witnesses and all that stuff. So fear and indoctrination is a big factor. But another factor that I think is somewhat unique to the Jehovah's Witness community specifically is ex-Jehovah's Witnesses have these terms, PIMO, POMO, and they basically are abbreviations. PIMO, for example, means physically in, mentally out. And it kind of represents the idea of Jehovah's Witnesses who are baptized and in the organization, who realize that it is all not true, but they stay in for whatever reason. And probably the biggest reason is because they don't want to lose all of their friends and family members by getting shunned.